My only Chinese for this evening, ni hao. A very warm welcome to this evening to all the guests who are here. It was really touching to hear Ms. G speak about grief. When Wei Qin first asked me or told me about this forum, I was going to introduce her to someone who was very well versed in our traditions and our scriptures, but that didn't quite work out. So you're left with a very lay person. I'm not an active follower of Hindu practices, but I do have a great interest in how it plays out in parts of our lives, somehow unconsciously or, subconsciously. So first, talking about grief. I guess grief to me is a coping mechanism for loss. And losses can be of many kinds, not just death. And for every loss we have, I guess we have grief. And like Ms. Chi mentioned, I also feel that grieving that comes with loss needs space. You need to grieve. And so the first thing is that maybe the death of a loved one is probably one of the most heart-wrenching losses we face, because there is something very final about someone who won't come back. That loss is probably the hardest to bear. And therefore, we have to give some space to grieve, because if you have loved, then grief is but natural. And if you live, I think this is an adage, you will grieve. So in this case, I found that while in India, we have many subjects that we never talk about in social circles or with parents, a lot of things about our feelings, emotions, body, all kinds of things that we never speak about in public. Somehow, death and life and death have always been a pretty natural conversation topic in India. And I'm talking about India because that's where our traditions kind of play out more naturally. When we live outside of our home country, then other cultures will also impact how we respond. But today I'm just going to kind of say how I grew up and the kind of traditions that helped. So for anyone who has friends from the Hindu tradition who may have had a bereavement in the family, we will know that our funeral rites and rituals are fairly long. They go on for many days. And they're not quiet affairs. Like everything that Indians do, it's kind of, there's a lot of things going on. It is an active scene for a long period of time. And even though there are great differences in the traditions of north, south, east, and west of India, it's a large country and we have various communities. But for this funeral rituals for the Hindus, for the most part, they're kind of on average between 10 to 13 days long. And for some cases, they may even extend up to 30 days. That's like kind of the active mourning cycle once someone departs. Now I feel that all of the stuff that goes into our funeral rituals and the traditions has a very important role to play for those who are left behind. And something that Ms. Chi was also talking about, sometimes when you feel alone, this is a very important bereavement. But our funeral rituals give you 4 to 5 days immediately after the loss for you to just grieve. There's nothing you need to take care of. Almost nothing. Because that role has been given, according to tradition, to others who are somewhat distant from the immediate loss. And I think this is very well thought out. It's very wise. They give you a few days in which you just do whatever is your natural reaction to a loss of a dear one. And sometimes you may go through all of the, sort of the well-established stages of grief in a very orderly fashion, or it's chaotic and there are all kinds of things. You may be stunned, you may deny it, you may get angry, you may have all kinds of emotions. And those who have been made responsible for those few days of what to do, they take care of you. And therefore, there is this kind of a cushion to grieve. And I think that's really essential. The first part is that you must let it out. Because we know, and I'm sure everyone who has worked in the field knows, that if you deny the grief, if you hold it back, if it doesn't have space to come out, some things will happen. Some things will break because it doesn't go away. It'll come out at a different time when you're unprepared. It may also end up in your own health breaking down. As Ms. Chi had also said, it happens a lot. So I was thinking when I was listening to her, that's why this kind of a ritual is very helpful. There are many people around you. They're a little bit more distant. They have a slight more objectivity. And when people come to help you grieve, they help you grieve by crying with you. This is kind of a tradition. And in some communities, they even hire people to cry out loud. It's like helping you get out of that stunned reaction, or the first, or the disbelief. And whether this is an expected death of an elderly person, which is different from the death of a middle-aged person who's still in the prime of his life, very different from the death of a young person at the sort of just at the threshold of adult life. And of course, for little children, that kind of grief is different. Post these few days of just letting it out, then there comes a few days in which you need to start participating with all those who are in charge and do some things. And those things are not leadership roles. They're still participative. And therefore, somehow you have to shake off some of the overwhelmed emotions and then start doing things. There are people who will guide you through it. And in our tradition, everyone, from the father's side, the mother's side, aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, friends, everyone plays a role in this event. One can already understand that there is a purpose for this, right? It really gives you a community that is watching over you to see what do you need. So it allows us that space where we can grieve yet not become overwhelmed by grief, that it becomes detrimental, it becomes abnormal, it becomes prolonged. Not to say that at some other point it might not happen, but generally, on an average, this does help in moving this along. And finally, when you come closer to that end of the mourning period, then you have to take charge. Then you have to decide what needs to be done. And that's kind of the point where you have to say, okay, so I've had this support, now I need to make sure that my community is thanked, my family is feeling that they have given me what I needed when I needed it, and now I need to, and then there is this major, as with everything Indian, there is a feast. And I'm sure there are other cultures that do that too. In a way, is a memorial where we do the kind of the more happier moment recall. So we think of all the good things, but we don't have a Western style of memorializing. It's individual to individual. When we meet each other, when we hug each other, we talk of our memories. We rarely have someone come up on stage and talk about it. But there's something that every one of us share, some memories of the person who has gone, or some memories of the person who is living. Something, there's a connection. So now, when I was thinking about this forum, I did talk to a lot of my friends who had recently experienced loss, and some of these losses were harsh. So I spoke with a friend of mine who 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, she's in her 40s, lost a 21-year-old daughter, her only child, under very tragic circumstances, to suicide. And I decided to have this conversation with her and her husband to make sure that I really have sort of an idea of how does this play out. And they went through a certain version of the traditions. And I realized then when I was talking with them that some of the things remain important, and our rituals do play a big role in how, at least this friend and another few friends that I talked to, that the community participation remains a major deal. The moment you hear something's happened, that's absolutely stunning, like in the sense you would never have expected out of the blue. Yet everyone, no matter how close they are to you, it's kind of the tradition. You need to turn up. You need to turn up in full force to support someone. There's no moment to think, am I gate crashing? Will she appreciate it? Is this okay? Because in our culture, somehow this private, personal space is not a concept. And they'll come inside, and she said that it really helped her to get through that. Then we have this kind of a monthly ritual for the first year. And my friend said that those monthly rituals were kind of a double-edged sword. One was there was something to do. That's a prayer that you need to go to the temple, you need to remember. So the remembrance was tough, but the prayer was peaceful. The prayer was calming. And then I was thinking, I'm not a very traditional person. I don't know many of the prayers. I don't go to the temple regularly to pray, though I do go to a place of prayer and listen. But I was thinking, wow, it still continues to play a role even when you're outside, and it's important that we must have this. And she said it gave her kind of a, when you're completely bewildered, completely overwhelmed, and you can imagine that the circumstances of death are very hard. She's young. There's so many ifs, what if, why not, how come? And then to have something to hook the next day and the next day, so you're leading up to that date in the month when the loss happened, and then you have to deal with it. And she said that this ritual, culminating in the year, at the end of the year, the annual memorial, that was very helpful in the grief, in dealing with the grief. Also, our tradition of going to the Ganges, our holy river, to immerse the ashes, somehow seemed to have a very important role to play in people's lives, particularly in understanding this need to let go of the person. And what I had meant to say earlier but forgot to say was that during the funeral, we read some passages from our Holy Scriptures that actually talk about something that young people may or may not know, but they hear it many times during the days that they're mourning. And that's about the permanence of the soul. And in the Bhagavad Gita, it's a kind of a conversation, and Lord Krishna, who's a personification of the divine, is telling Arjuna, who is the royal warrior who seems to be grieving the imminent death of members of his family he will go to war against. And Lord Krishna is saying, don't worry. Don't worry. Your killing or not killing them is not going to change the fact, for those that are born will die. That's a certainty. And those who die will be born. This is not the first time that has happened. It's not the last time it's going to happen. This is going to happen many times. And you've been here before. You don't remember, but I do. This kind of telling him, don't worry about it. The soul cannot be destroyed by the destruction of the body. And so this kind of conversation is going on while you are learning to grieve. And so when we keep listening to this conversation growing up about the indestructibility of the soul, this letting go has somehow becomes a little bit easier. So I think most Indians who have grown up with that feeling would do. So I'm running out of time. And so I would just say that one other example of a loss that I wanted to say was that, sometimes you lose something so you lose a loved one, it's like a part of yourself is gone. But when you lose something like your memory, or you lose a limb, or you lose, your life savings, or something like that, they come with their own grief. But one of the things that we can train for, and I think that this is what, when Rachel and I were talking, was something that I was really passionate about, is how in our everyday lives, when we are just living, we make the habit of looking at challenges and then trying to figure out, for every kind of challenge, doesn't matter what kind of challenge is there, how can we build an inner resilience that will help us overcome it? And one of the things that one of the people I listened to, okay, I'm out of time, but I'll take half a minute more to say that what we do is look for inspiration and learning every day when we are meeting challenges, and change the stories so that we are listening to stories that are empowering us, so that when we have to face bigger losses, we kind of have some resilience to override it on our own, and we don't get overwhelmed by it. And so I just had to say that my sister-in-law needed to have her leg amputated because she was born with spina bifida, and by the time she was in her late teens, she had to lose the limb. But when I see her today, I realize that when people know how to look at all the windows that open up when a door shuts, and that was my title, they have a way to deal with loss that's very inspiring, and all of us should learn from it, because she took her prosthetics to be her liberation, and then she lives her life more fully than anyone I see around her. And so we should maybe talk about how do we build this inner resilience when we're not really facing yet the big losses. Thank you, and sorry I went over time.